brief context about this session. So India operates one of the largest social welfare system in the world, whether it is in food security, livelihood, or maybe in healthcare as well. Uh, Also, when we talk about responsible AI or responsible AI deployment, specifically in the production side, we talk about how it will behave in the real world, how it will scale, if anything goes wrong, who should held accountable, and etc. Also, in social welfare system, errors are not abstract actually. They translate on ground. It could lead to exclusion, lead to hardship, and at the same time, loss of dignity. So this is what we are going to talk about in today's session. Because this is a short session, so we are going to have one question for each panel members. We'll try to have, finish within that time. So my first question to you, Maya, from a policy perspective, what safeguards should be in place before we even think to deploy AI in production and specifically for social welfare systems?
This one. So hello everyone. First of all, wonderful to be here, and thank you so much for the organizers for creating this session. Definitely timely and important session, and wonderful to be alongside the co-panelists. I think there are a few safeguards that we're currently thinking on. And I think that the beauty that in many ways the answer to this question is evolving over time. I feel that in the past we were focusing a lot on diversity by design, meaning how we can make sure that more people are able to access technologies. We were speaking a lot about biases, trying to see how we're making sure that the technology that we're creating is not causing more harm than good. I feel that now we're shifting a bit the discussion on the scalability. We're trying to discuss a bit more in terms of safeguard on how we're enabling the infrastructure to be more scalable, to work over time. So I think that in a ways, it's also perhaps a reflection of how AI has evolved over time. That if in the beginning we were looking just AI purely, meaning AI tools, the way that they are being perceived, how we can tackle diversity biases, we do understand that today AI needs to operate at scale. So the safeguard, the thing that we're trying to think of, are also becoming much more infrastructural. And I think it's an interesting shift that I've been seeing in the scholarly community around it, meaning it's still the broad ethical guide that we've been speaking about. We are aware that we need to make sure that biases, we have the right counters. We know how to deal with linguistic diversity in a way, but we're advancing. And I feel that today the discussion has shifted a bit on how we are thinking in an infrastructural level, meaning we have foundational models coming into place. So the discussions around safeguard have shifted a bit, I think, as a result of it. That's my perspective, at least, to the question. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm just building on that, and Pratik, I will come to you now, more from a citizen impact and fairness perspective. So when AI excludes somebody from this social scheme, and we see that most of these systems actually ask citizen to prove the identity or eligibility. So in this case, in the responsible AI deployment, if you think from this perspective, like whether this is a design failure or this is something to do with policy. And if you can just bring some insight from an Indian perspective, that would also be interesting. Yeah.
Thank you. I think very important question, and very quickly, right? Back to basics. I think this is something that we think of. The Kranzberg first law for technology says technology is neither good nor bad nor the neutral, right? Which is essentially to say that when you're deploying them in certain scenarios, it's going to take the shape of the system that is. And so in the Indian context, it's going to work how things work in India. When when you introduce it in public delivery, it's also going to take on the shape of how public delivery already works, right? So just to take on, I guess, some examples which will sort of illustrate my point, and I'm drawing on work that, in fact, one of our panelists, Kumar, has done. There's some reporting that's happened around the special intensive review process that's going on right now, and other work on the public distribution system. So you see cases where, for example, there was a 102-year-old man. He was declared dead. And it took to get the local administration's attention. He staged almost like a wedding ceremony, or what we call a barat, right? Literally to essentially get their to get their attention. In another state in the country, about, if I'm getting my numbers right, about 70% of people were initially marked ineligible for pension. for social welfare of that sort. It was eventually reversed in some cases, but there was, as you said, there's a process, which becomes, they essentially get caught in a bureaucratic trap, trying to get themselves cleared. Right? There were cases where 64-year-old widow, her pension was stopped because the system in use somehow estimated that her 9-year-old granddaughter had an income of 600,000 rupees or 6 lakh rupees. Right? She had to eventually, I think, go to court to sort some of these out. There were cases where I think a family was denied welfare because it said they had a car and they didn't. So you have a lot of these cases where a decision is made, right, based on either incorrect data or inadequate data, or data sets not being cleaned properly, etc., etc., etc. And once that happens, the as you pointed out, the proof is on, or the burden of proof is on the citizen, right, or on someone receiving either that benefit to do that. And that's where the property of the existing system comes in, where you are you have to prove that you're alive, right? Or you have to prove that you're not earning this money, but the system that allowed the fault to take place, there isn't redressal there, right? And I think where we sort of go wrong is going again back to the basic aspect of it, is that we don't have the redressal mechanisms in place, right? When you're going to deploy systems like this, errors are going to happen. The question is, even without that, are your redressal mechanisms strong enough to be able to sustain some of that? And I think until we're building that, which is independent of technology deployment, right? Unless we're actually building those systems to be responsive, to be resilient, to actually cover all citizens, we're going to keep having this conversation again and again.
Thanks so much. And actually, this creates a good foundation for the accountability part. And I will ask Ran on that. Like, when welfare AI system cause harm, like who realistically can stop this, and what it tells about the gaps in the accountability. If you just observe it, yeah.
Yeah, happy to. So just so that you understand where I'm coming from, For Humanity is a charity that's established exclusively to look at the risk from these tools. So I'm only going to talk about downside. I don't want you to think that we're AI naysayers, not in this environment, right? So, but I need you to understand that social welfare has extreme risks. Not only risks to the people. So in the Netherlands, they displaced 2,000 children, took them out of their homes and displaced them because AI told them to. In addition to that, if you think that there was only risk to those children and those families, which is terrible, the government was turned over because of that. So if there's any politicians in the room, it's an important message to understand that you want to be building AI wisely, responsibly, in a trustworthy manner. Now, what does that mean? I'm going to speak in bullet points. We only have 2.5 minutes. I'm going to be outside if anybody wants to talk more about this stuff. I could talk for days, okay? So when we talk about the micro level, we need transparency of process. We need explainability of these choices. We need to understand that there's originally a duty of care that must exist from the provider of the social benefit, and that they're operating with that duty of care. In addition to that, we need to have grievance mechanisms, redressal for these problems, and they have to be simplified and they have to be fast. These are people's lives. At a macro level, procurers of these systems, whether they're state, federal, or other types of social welfare, should be doing so with robust assurance mechanisms. That could involve what we work towards regularly, independent audit of AI systems, a set of rules laid out through a procurement process that satisfies the techno-legal responsibilities of the organization. Collectively, macro and micro approaches will help the issuance of social welfare schemes achieve their very necessary and very valuable goals in a responsible way. Thanks.
That's well put. And when one recurring issue that we see in the responsible AI, that in principle it looks very strong, but when you implement something, we start seeing some weaknesses in it as well, right? And at scale, the responsibility get distributed. whether it is tech policy or the operations as well. So to handle all of these, we need governance in operationalization, and basically to complete this, the entire circle of question, I just want to go to Jennifer, and Jennifer wanted to understand from an enterprise perspective, like how organization operationalize AI, like responsible AI deployment at scale, and at Adobe, at your organization, how you are basically handling this critical situation.
Great, thank you. I'm very happy to be here from Adobe. Hope many of you are aware of not using our tools. Look, one of the things that I've been really pleased about with the leadership at Adobe, our CEO mentioned actually at an internal meeting just a couple of years ago when AI was really starting to take off, that for Adobe, it's not can we develop and deploy AI, it's should we, right? Where we always have to think about the should, and I really feel that's a very important value when you're thinking about doing anything. And when you think about a company being very much sort of a microcosm of a government, right? Adobe thinks about how we're going to serve our customers. The government is thinking always, how are we going to serve our citizens? And what is the risk? And what are we going to do as an organization, as a government, as a company, as a nonprofit? How are we going to deploy these things responsibly? I was pleased to see a number of the signs around Delhi today. Prime Minister Modi's quotes and talks a lot about human innovation. And I think one of the most important values that we hold dear at Adobe is keeping the humans at the center of everything. Because if we don't do that, we're all going to find ourselves in a lot of trouble. When you think about something like social welfare, right, you've got to think about serving and protecting the citizens. And you have all the different areas where you look at risk and you do risk impact assessments. This is something that does impact real lives, and so it has to be treated quite differently than, say, something that's going to deploy AI to help people find out where they're going to go on holiday. It's very, very different. So at Adobe, well before AI came on the scene, since we've been doing so much digital innovation deployment over many, many years, we have an ethics review board within Adobe. Right now it is the AI Ethics Review Board, where every new AI tool has to go through that board. The engineers have to propose what they want to do. It goes through an impact assessment. There's a diverse board of people that look at things like bias, so it's not just a boardroom of white men looking at to see if this thing makes sense. That's far from the case. And then we have a very robust sort of system of training and testing, getting feedback, having that diverse input. And then, again, that feedback is important, right? What's working, what's not working? Send that back to Adobe. What can we do to improve upon things? So we're making sure we keep people at the center. And most importantly, we have humans within the company that are making the decisions that do impact lives. So I'll stop there because I know we don't have a lot of time, but we can continue the conversation.
Sure, that's wonderful. In fact, at Fujitsu, we are actually working in AI for last 40 years, and we have a separate ethics and governance office that actually takes care of safe and secure deployment of AI system. So if I have to conclude this session, it must be on 5 foundation. So AI in this civil, AI, this social service must be appropriate, accurate, available, and it should be accountable and aligned with human dignity. So if any of these is missing, then efficiency is not the responsibility. So with these words, I will conclude this session. Thank you so much for joining, and thank you all of you for your wonderful inputs.
Thank you to our speakers for that insightful discussion. Having heard perspectives on responsible deployment of AI systems in social welfare delivery, we now have a multi-stakeholder panel to discuss on the impact of responsible AI in social welfare delivery. For this, we have Gabby, who leads the impact program at 11 Labs. Our next speaker is Kishore Balaji, the Executive Director for Government Affairs at IBM, India, South Asia. Also joining this panel is Abhishek Jain, the Chief Financial Officer at Stripe. The dialogue will be moderated by Kumar Sambhav, the founder and CEO of NutGraph Social Data Lab. Over to you, Kumar Sambhav.
Thank you so much, Kritika, and hello everyone. Good afternoon. Really, thanks to the organizers and kudos Data Lab is an organization that collects great data from the ground to inform policies and insights. So our job is to really look at what's really happening on the ground and bring that to the table to inform policies and decisions, of course, for the development and the progress of the country, of the people. Now, to set the context, I think our speakers did very good job in the previous session. I'll just read an excerpt from one of the case studies that we did on AI in the social welfare on the ground. So I'll read from that. So Sheila Devi can't conceive of owning a car. The 67-year-old widow and 12 members of her family live in a cramped 3-room house in an urban slum. Since her rickshaw puller husband's death over 2 years ago from mouth cancer, Sushila makes a living by peeling garlic for a local business. But an algorithmic system deployed to ascertain the eligibility of welfare claimants and to catch welfare fraud tagged Sushila's husband as a car owner when he was still alive. This deprived her of the subsidized food that the government must provide to the poor under the law. The algorithmic system took her late husband, Shyam Lal, the rickshaw puller, for Shyam Lal Sharma, a car owner. And the authorities accepted its words. So when the COVID-19 pandemic was raging and her husband's cancer had peaked, Sushila was running between government authorities to convince them that she indeed was poor. The authorities did not trust her. They believed the algorithm. Quote begins, "If we had money to buy a car, why would we live like this?" She asks. "If the officials came to my house, perhaps they would also see that. But nobody visited us." So what I think the speaker in the previous session did speak about what's the harm that we are talking about, what's the risk we are talking about. In India, welfare sort of provides dignity and rights and sustenance to almost half of the population. $256 billion money goes into welfare delivery, and it provides food, rights, etc. So sometimes exclusion means going hungry, and sometimes exclusion also means going without pension, being declared dead. So with that context, I would like to invite my first speaker, Kishore. IBM has worked with the state governments on many of the welfare systems. They've deployed technologies. What do you think when we talk at scale? How do we bring in transparency, accountability, and safety at scale in algorithmic systems, in AI systems when it comes to welfare?
Just added one more dimension to the trouble since morning. Firstly, thanks a lot for having me here. Such a pleasure to be among you all today. And I, for one, to begin with, believe that technology is the smartest and the most efficient way of solving some of these issues. But again, for the benefit or the goodness to accrue, you've got to have checks and balances in place. Now, very topically, I saw several of the notes that I'd made covered in the previous discussion too. The example that you highlighted was perhaps an opening comment I had, that technology for the sake of technology in an ungoverned, without a human in the loop model is a very, very big risk. So as technology scales, it's very evident that the AI is by design not to replace a public servant, but to augment a public servant. You cannot have a situation where unmanaged technology totally automates a process, leaving out the human in the value chain to take value-based decision. Therefore, human in the loop is something that is very, very important, especially for a technology which is so fast emerging as we speak today, as we see today. The second is, as you build solutions. Okay.
Closer to the mic.
Yes, I'll try. Is it better? Perfect. The second aspect is, technology. The designers of the solution should look at engineering fairness into the system. So fairness is not something that should be assumed. I mean, people should be very mindfully engineering that into the process. That will help people have more, eyes on the solution, to look at bias, to look at, all aspects of issues cropping up, testing them, auditing them, cataloging those issues, and solving for them. Now, as I see it, if we don't build for fairness, we'll be automating for inequality. From that perspective, it's very, very important, apart from human in the loop, to look at how we build for fairness into the system, how we engineer that. Apart from that, of course, yeah, it's important that people trust the AI process, for which explainability and transparency remain very, very key. And lastly, there is a temptation to use technology to scale to solve, issues of this stature and scale, right? So while doing so, fundamentals of irresponsible AI, like the previous panel discussed too, are very, very important. And people should be very mindful to bring it all together so that technology can actually accrue the dividend that it promises to accrue than, just automating the process in a very inhumane way. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think two things really came out from Kishore's point is one, human in the loop protocols, which is essential, something that should be built in the policy and design. And like what he said, if you don't design for fairness, you are automating inequality. So hopefully we'll avoid that risk. I'll come to you, Gabi. You have actually, I mean, the idea behind your work and the company has been to make AI useful for the humanity, right? What from your work you think has been, could be the challenges that could come specifically in the Indian context, and how the practice of responsible deployment design and policies around AI could mitigate those risks and build for a better AI?
Yeah, absolutely. Is my mic on? Yes. So I'm Gabby. I work at 11 Labs, and I run our impact program. So through the impact program, we partner with nonprofit organizations and then also provide our technology for free to individuals with accessibility needs. So one of the largest areas in which we find that that's useful is individuals with permanent voice loss are able to create voice clones and then communicate using those voice clones through their accessible technology communication devices. Now, India is extraordinarily linguistically diverse, and there's also a stark digital divide. So when we're thinking about how do we really serve the population, it requires a lot of local collaboration. I would say that's a large pillar for us as we expand into India. So a lot of it is about finding flagship nonprofit partners within India who are able to ensure that we're delivering useful technology, representative technology. And then also when we're talking about audio AI, of course, it's incredibly linguistically diverse. And so, we have 12 Indian languages available on the platform, but that doesn't nearly touch the number of not just languages, but also dialects. And so it's also been really important for us to partner with local ecosystem builders who bring in local creators who record their voices and put them on our platform. Not only does that allow us to have more variety and diversity in the Indian languages and dialects that we have available for others, but also those creators receive commission every time their voices are used. So there's also like an economic opportunity there. We work with one ecosystem builder in particular who is trying to bring in more blind individuals to record their voices and put them on the platform to provide an economic opportunity that may not otherwise be there. Additionally, with the digital divide, we have issues with bandwidth. We're, of course, a cloud-based service. And so, again, partnership is key. So we partner with companies like WhatsApp who are able to operate in low bandwidth environments and on lesser, like smartphones that don't operate quite as quickly. So that's been really important for us. I also think audio we've seen has been a very important accessibility layer when we're thinking about low literacy and low vision. And so having social welfare being delivered multimodally, so having auditory ways of accessing that information, visual ways of accessing that information, that has also allowed us to be more accessible to more people, is offering multimodal information and democratizing access to information in that way.
Thank you, Gabi. I'll come to you, Abhishek. We did discuss what are the challenges and what are the, say, self-regulation to say, or voluntary sort of practices that the companies can use in designing these models or systems that could be deployed for welfare. what do you think from the international experience of policies, right? We have examples like EU's AI Act, which deals with the risk assessment framework. There are other practices which are about human rights-based impact assessment of these systems before they are deployed. There are other practices by international organizations like UNESCO. How some of those could be adopted in the Indian context, and a framework for before deployment that these risks are covered, checks and balances are played. How can a framework be developed for that?
Thanks. Hello, everyone. I'm Abhishek. I come from a company called Strive, where we strongly believe that AI is no more a consulting job. It is where we operationalize AI, right? And our previous panels talked about it, and maybe through our examples, I'll elaborate it as well as to what we do when we say operationalizing AI, right? I think we have, as you said, a lot of frameworks and policies that has been drafted. One theme that come out very clearly is that, that AI governance has to be proportionate to the risk that it carries, right? It cannot be the same governance level applied to the same features. What I mean by is, like we talked about a lot of examples of citizen being discriminated in terms of the benefits that they are eligible from the government offices, any compliances requirements and so forth, right? So there, the act of AI has to be much more stronger than any other, which is that is driven by EU. If you see UNESCO, they are more driven human-centric, right? Which is saying human in loop. I'll give you one example, right? We have Pradhan Mantri Yojana, which is more from a housing and other perspective. What we see is that if you're not eligible because your electricity bill or XYZ was higher than what your eligibility are, we just send a denial note. What we have seen government now infusing it is that we are sending them in a bilingual local languages as well, where the real people understand that's why the denial was happened, right? And then just giving you one use case of how the AI is being used by our government itself in a different ways as well, right? On the other stuff, I think what I believe from our perspective is that we should not use the global framework in a same word baptism. We should see that how human in the loop, as our friend said, is very, very critical to our countries. Our country is very different than any other large org or large country as well, because of multi-language and multiple places that we are in, very different regions. So human in the loop is very, very critical. I think the audit procedures for us becomes very, very critical as well. Clear accountability and ownership would be other theme, I would say, which would be very critical from our point of view. And post-deployment monitoring would be another thing which will be very, very critical, at least from our country's standpoint of view, I would say.
Thanks, Abhishek. I think our panel has done a wonderful job in keeping to the time limit. So really, kudos to them. Just to conclude a few things that I thought were emerging from the session in the previous one. I think exclusion has been talked about majorly. And as someone in the previous panel said, that exclusion is not just the risk for people, it is a risk for the scaling of AI as well. If you want social buying in, if you want political buy-in, we need to see that such problems do not emerge on the ground, because from the example we looked at, there were hundreds of thousands of people getting excluded. They went to the court, and then a lot of, it wasn't a good sort of buying in for those systems that were deployed in those situations. So I think investing in the beginning in these processes is even makes for a good business sense as well, because you don't want your systems eventually to be scraped or get a bad public image, right? So, and I think a few other things were that apart from exclusion, there have been issues about misuse of data in some instances. There have been instances of also opaqueness and transparency about how these systems actually work. And that transparency is also important, especially in the government deployed systems, because that's about taxpayers' money which is being used. So I think on that point, I would close for this panel. And thank you so much for being wonderful speakers and wonderful panelists. Thank you.
Thank Thank you to our speakers for this insightful discussion. We'll now move on to the last session of the day where we'll hear more of technical perspective on the responsible development of AI systems in social welfare delivery. Our first speaker is Professor Balaraman Ravindran, who heads the Center for Responsible AI at IIT Madras. Our next speaker is Gaurav Godwani, who is the founder and co-director at Civic Data Lab. Also joining us is Dr. Isabel Elbert, the co-lead of UN Human Rights on BTech project. The dialogue will be moderated by Sundar Narayanan, who is an AI ethicist and advisor. Over to Sundar.
That's a lot of pressure to finish on time. Okay. I want to, the one difference that we're doing here is that we are starting the AI system development for social welfare delivery at the last. So that you've already heard the other stories. Let's come to this at the last and let's see what we are here for. We're going to do it as a rapid fire style, as quickly as possible, quick answers, and then we are going to move on. So any details that you need, find all of them anywhere you get hold of them, get to speak with them, right? I want to start with Professor Ravi.
Okay,
That's
go
an
on,
easy
yeah.
target, you know.
Sure.
So I want to start with you more from a perspective of when somebody is looking at social welfare delivery and investing in AI, how should they actually start looking at the problem? From your perspective, should they start from what's the impact it's going to create, or what's the technology that they would need? Should they look for, or they should look at the socio-technical kind of facets? You can rank them the way you think is the best priority to look at.
Okay, so again, can you repeat the choices again? Sorry, I'm making
Data.
it harder for you to stay on time, but
Data,
yeah.
a technology alignment, and the third one is the kind of impact.
Social impact,
Social impact.
So
Socio-technical.
I think the most important aspect we should look at is actually going to be the impact on the ground. If all stars align and they are able to deliver, what will be the impact on the ground? And if that is going to be sizable, then it is worth trying to answer all the other hard questions. If not, we shouldn't be.
Wonderful. Just coming to you, Isabel, on that. When we are speaking about impact as the most important thing, right? How do you see the impact from a deployment environment perspective? You need to think about what impact it's going to cause and accordingly prepare for your development process. So what are the considerations that you would think from that standpoint? What would be the priority that you would look at?
So that was a risk that I took, the wrong microphone. The previous panel really did a deep dive into the risks. I think the alignment issue is really something that will hit when the context of deployment is then specific.
Closer.
And the key issue is really accuracy can have, most should have the highest value, because a small error can exclude millions of people. And if you scale and you have a small error and you don't assess the context properly, that can be a key issue.
Wonderful. Gaurav, that comes to your point in terms of when we're speaking about small error, it can exclude people, right? It's going to be a bias kind of a problem. What is the real issue in bias? Is it the data issue, or is it the socio-political issue, which is the underlying factor for the data, or is it the issue of how the technology is built?
With your permission, I'm going to play a bit of a poll with the audience so that we keep
Wonderful.
it more interactive and inclusive. So the question was very simple, right? Is it the data problem where we see the technology issues, socioeconomic inclusion, or is it because of how the algorithms are made? What do you think?
This reminds me of KBC, huh? You're asking the audience.
I'm doing an audience poll to begin with, and then I would give my remarks. I personally feel it's a socioeconomic problem. Raise hand if you also believe so. It's because of the socioeconomic nature of how we are placed and how we collect data, how we co-create these solutions, we end up excluding most of the people. And it's not the problem of data biases, because while these data systems were created, inherently the bias came into picture. they were not very inclusive in nature, and that's where we result into a scenario where we are seeing a socioeconomic bias in place, or the algorithms for that matter, because they're trained on those data sets which were having bias to begin with, and they were tried in a laboratory which was not well tested in a participatory environment, and we result in a scenario where we face exclusion.
Wonderful, Gaurav. Professor Ravi, the question then to you is that if the issue
Don't ask me how to fix the socio.
no, definitely not. That's why we're all here. So we'll understand. So my question there is that if the issue that causes bias is socio-political issue, how would you evaluate it at the time of development for that kind of a problem? What would be your top 3 priorities to look at to evaluate that? Not the technology, not the data, but to focus on socio-political contributor of bias.
Wow. Okay.
I'm sure it's a 1-hour lecture worth, but
no.
I'm just saying.
I mean, I'm not even sure I completely understand the question. So your question is, hey, will you be able to evaluate what is the contribution of the socio-political, system into causing the bias, or I mean, what is?
Yeah. How will you so bias is one of the factors in the broader thing. Now, what we are saying is broader risks that can impact the social welfare delivery. In that context, socio-political underlying factors, the social context or social factors are underlying factors that that is a direct contributor to the implications that we are speaking about.
Sure.
How will you evaluate them while you are looking at developing?
I mean, the textbook answer would be to see if I can do some kind of a controlled experiment where some of these factors have been mitigated and so on and so forth. But the problem is, in real life, you cannot do that, right? So it becomes a significant challenge. So the one kind of a surrogate that you could potentially look at it, right? Saying that you can run hypothetical experiments. You can't run real experiments, but you can run hypothetical experiments where you actually manually change change the attributes that could potentially be causing the socio-political issues, right? And then see how well your system performs. So that way you can say that it's like more like a counterfactual analysis. Right? If this hadn't happened, so what would my system have done, right? But for that to really work, I need to have a very good understanding of what should be the counterfactuals I should be setting up. And I don't think, at least in the context of India, I don't know if we have a good understanding of that. We don't have a systematic recording of all the things that are possibly causing this kind of. For example, I'll give you one simple thing, right? So when people actually try to be more inclusive of women voices about certain opinion, so there were people who were sent to the villages and told to interview women, and later on it was found that most of the women answers was given by the husband. Right? So how would you even how do you even evaluate? I mean, you've made an effort to make sure that you're being inclusive, but still there are factors that. So it's hard to write it down, but the way to do it would be to do some kind of a counterfactual loop. But then the first step would be to figure out what is it that you should be controlling for.
Brilliant. One of the things that has come out, Isabel, is that one, participatory kind of evaluation, participatory kind of development mechanism, and using counterfactuals as a mechanism to test for AI systems as you develop them, right? From your approach and perspective, how do you see them, given that there are a lot of context and causalities in the way it is getting applied in a particular environment? How do you see that? What are the top 2 or top 3 things that you would consider from that perspective, how to bring in context or causalities into this whole mix to make it more meaningful?
Okay, well, we're diving deep into a sort of academic panel here, right? Those of you that were tortured with statistics and methods in university, you are having a lot of joy, I guess. I think what is key is that we need a multidisciplinary methodology, right? Because the problem that you were describing is a social science problem. Why is the lady not answering the questions for the ladies, right? But then also we have the data problem. So I actually think, to your poll, if I may, I wouldn't exclude the two, because it cannot be either or. Yeah. So I represent the BTEC project at the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, and a lot of the risks that we heard are actually human rights issues about discrimination. It's about discrimination of women, discrimination of people that are very vulnerable. And here it's really important that we understand that we need to test all these applications with very robust red teaming, with pilots, with stakeholder engagement. So we need the engineers, but we also need the social scientists, we need the political scientists, we need to understand the social context on the ground. And here we're hitting a key problem, is that I'm not necessarily speaking about the context of India, but around the globe, there are a lot of off-the-shelf solutions that government agencies use, and where they actually know very little about the system properties. So all the questions that you ask, many of the government agencies wouldn't be able to answer them because they actually don't know this about the product. They're just sort of deploying it in the context. And we heard the example of the Netherlands. Now the Netherlands are actually one of the government that's really preaching a lot around algorithmic impact assessment, transparency, human rights considerations. So in that sense, I think there's a lot of potential of getting these deployments right. But if we really invest in the pre-deployment stage and do a lot of robust testing, red teaming in a multidisciplinary setup. And then just last but not least, there might still be some use cases where we can actually not use AI, right? So also let's not forget that.
Understand. Gaurav, this goes to this point of, let's say, if you're speaking about multidisciplinary setup, right? One of the things that you bring value in with a lot of your work is how social data is so very critical in these processes, right? What are the top 2 or 3 challenges that you face to bring the data to the table with the stakeholders, right?
Right. So we take a more of a life cycle approach throughout the development of AI. We need a participatory approach to bring in 2 specific experts. One is the culture experts who are present from that location, from that geography, who know that geography really well, who have the socioeconomic understanding of that geography. Second is the domain expert. Suppose you're deploying it for agriculture, so someone who has worked with farmer advisory very closely, need to be present in the whole process and define what are the variables we need to collect, how we have to collect it, and how do we ensure we have regular participatory checks at all the stages of development, right from the starting of the commissioning to collecting your data, ensuring your data is standardized, then you start piloting your model, and then you start scaling the model, and finally going to the deployment stage. This whole life cycle we take in a more participatory approach and see what kind of existing data sets and other proxy data sets we can collect to make it more inclusive in nature.
This comes to another question that I wanted to ask you, Professor Ravi. It's about, let's say, if wherever we don't have data, we are actually looking at proxy kind of data, right? Now, that proxy data has its own kind of challenges that it comes with, right? How should people who are working on AI development for social welfare delivery consider those while taking into account those proxy data? How should they actually take this into context while they're working on a solution per se?
There is no simple universal answer to that, right?
Yeah.
It depends on the context and depends on the problem that you're trying to solve, and depends on, how much of a quote unquote causal structure that you have about the missing data, so that you can use the data that you are able to measure in order to infer what the missing data is.
Yeah.
And if you don't have anything at all about that, right? If you're literally tossing coins and then trying to fill in the data, then don't. Then spend the effort that you are doing to build the model to actually go get the data, right? I mean, there are some points, but if there is another way that the mechanisms, right, the social mechanisms that cause the data to be produced, and then you can possibly fill in some of the synthetic data, but it's very, very context dependent. I don't think that's a universal answer to that.
That's right. That's great. So I have a last point to ask all of you, which is about, okay, given the India is going to be one of the largest economies for social welfare delivery. It will be as well, right? Given that, what are the top 3 points that you would ask everybody working on social welfare delivery with AI to take into consideration from your lens?
Okay, I start. Well, I think the first thing is key design principles. I talked about methods before. We can also call it design principles anchored in human rights due diligence with regard to human agency, escalation pathways if something goes wrong, so that people can actually turn to a human and say, I've been discriminated against. accessibility in terms of people that may have lower digital literacy rate or no literacy at all, bias monitoring and accountability logs, so that there isn't, we talked about the burden of proof earlier in the panel, right? So accountability logs can ensure that it can be documented for audits what went wrong.
I think three things from my perspective. Number one, keeps humans in the loop. By humans, ensure the local experts, the local indigenous population who get impacted by all of these decision making need to have a seat on the table right from the beginning itself. Number two, we have to keep it open. Not just open source, but have openness to critical feedback, openness to collaborate, openness to also fit the solution in a more collaborative manner. And third is make multidisciplinary work for your work and ensure everyone has a right understanding of this problem, which takes a lot of time. So we can't just fast track your development cycle if you have to make it inclusive.
Okay, so everything both of them said, and then you know, one thing which I always like to emphasize is that please make sure you're solving the right problem. Right? Don't solve the problem that you can solve. Solve the problem that can have the maximum impact for whatever you're trying to do. That's one. And second, also do think a little bit about second order effects. So because that can have a significant backlash. I mean, of course, other more important things they have went. So I'm just I'm trying to add variety to this. But these are two things. And of course, my third thing was the thing that I said.
Wonderful. I think the panelists have actually represented a wider variety of aspects that you need to take into account in the broader context. But I wanted to just broadly summarize it in a way. I would like to call this as a prism view, right? P for principles, practices, or purpose. Just look at that to start with. R for risks or rewards. Look at it. Third, more from a perspective of impact, from a downstream impact perspective. S from social factors perspective, and M for market influences. Do not ever miss out on market influence, because even in social welfare delivery, there is economics in it. Right? If you're not able to take into account the market considerations that may have a greater influence on some of these decisions, it may have further impact. I would like to thank all the panelists for their contribution and for accommodating this rapid fire style work. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for joining us and sharing your valuable insights. On the behalf of India AI team, we would like to present you with some moment of appreciation. I would also like to request all the panelists to come in front and get a group photo.